I just want to feel normal, she whispered, her voice barely louder than the engines cooling in the night air. The words hung there, fragile, as the last Harley rumbled into silence. The parking lot outside the roadside diner was washed in orange sodium lights, cracked asphalt reflecting oil stains and long shadows. The Hells Angels sat in a loose half-circle, leather jackets heavy on their shoulders, patches catching the glow. Most people crossed the street when they saw them. Some ran. Tonight, one woman stood still. Her name was Emily Carter, and she looked like someone who had been tired for a very long time. She clutched the sleeves of her worn hoodie like it was armor. Her hair was pulled back, messy, practical, not for style, but survival. Her eyes carried the distant look people get when life has taken more than it ever gave back. She hadn't come looking for trouble. Trouble had followed her most of her life anyway. One of the bikers, a massive man with a gray beard and calm eyes, tilted his head. His road name was Bear, and he'd seen war zones quieter than that parking lot. Normal, he repeated gently, like tasting the word. What does that look like to you, kid? Emily swallowed. Not being stared at. Not being pitted. Not being treated like I'm broken. She forced a small laugh. Just one night where I'm not the sick girl, or the charity case, or the one people feel sorry for. The men exchanged looks. These weren't boys pretending to be hard. These were men who had buried brothers, ridden through storms, and learned that pain doesn't always look the same. Sometimes it comes wrapped in silence. Bear nodded once. Sit, he said, pulling out a chair like it was the most natural thing in the world. Emily hesitated. Everyone she'd ever trusted had eventually reminded her she was different. But something in the way he said it, not demanding, not pitying, made her sit. Another biker slid a cup of hot chocolate toward her. Not beer. Not whiskey. Chocolate. Simple. Thoughtful. Why yes? Asked a younger angel, his arms inked with old stories. Emily stared into the steam rising from the cup. Because you didn't look at me like I was fragile, she said. You looked at me like I was just someone. That landed harder than any insult ever could. Emily told them her story in pieces. About the illness that stole her 20s. About friends who stopped calling. About nights watching social media while the world lived without her. About how she used to love music, dancing, laughing, and how all of that slowly slipped away. I don't need saving, she said quietly. I just want to remember who I was. The diner door creaked open behind them, music spilling out, an old rock song from a dusty jukebox. One of the bikers grinned. You dance? Emily blinked. I used to. Then tonight, Bear said, standing up, you do again. Inside the diner, heads turned. Leather jackets. Heavy boots. A woman in a hoodie standing among them. People whispered. Emily froze. Bear leaned down. You want normal? Then don't hide. So she didn't. They pushed tables aside. Someone fed the jukebox. Laughter broke out, real laughter, not careful or forced. One biker clapped to the rhythm. Another spun a napkin like a stage prop. Emily felt it first in her chest, a warmth she hadn't felt in years. She danced, not perfectly. Not gracefully. But honestly, and no one stared at her scars. No one asked about her past. No one treated her like she was about to break. She was just a woman dancing to loud music on a random night with a group of bikers who decided kindness mattered more than reputation. Outside, motorcycles lined up like guardians. Inside, something healed, and if you've ever wondered how powerful one moment of acceptance can be, this is where you might want to subscribe. Because stories like this remind us that humanity still exists in unexpected places. The night didn't end when the music stopped. Someone brought out milkshakes. Someone else told a ridiculous road story that had Emily laughing so hard she forgot to be careful with her breath. For the first time in years, her body didn't feel like an enemy, just a place she lived in. Later, Bear handed her a leather patch. Not an official one. No rules broken. Just a simple winged emblem with the word normal stitched beneath it. What's this? She asked. A reminder, he said. You don't earn worth. You already have it. Outside, the air was cool. The engines roared back to life, thunder echoing across the empty road. Emily stood between them, not small, not invisible. "I'll remember this forever," she said. Bear smiled. "That's the idea." They rode escort for the first mile, not because she needed protection, but because sometimes being seen is the greatest gift of all. Then one by one, the bikes peeled away, headlights disappearing into the dark. Emily walked home alone, but she wasn't lonely. That night didn't cure her illness. It didn't fix her past. But it did something quieter and stronger. It reminded her she was still alive, and maybe that's what normal really is. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that kindness can come from the least expected places, subscribe to the channel. Because stories like this aren't just entertainment, they're proof that even in a loud, broken world, moments of compassion still roar louder than hate. Weeks later, Emily didn't expect the sound of engines to make her heart race again, but it did. She was standing outside the community hall on Maple Street, a place that smelled of old wood and fresh paint, clutching a folded flyer in her hand. "Open mic night, everyone welcome." She had almost turned back twice. Normal people didn't hesitate this much just to walk inside a building. But then again, she was done deciding what normal people did. The memory of that night at the diner lived in her like a steady flame. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just warm enough to keep her moving forward. Inside the hall, a few locals were setting up chairs. Someone tested a microphone. A teenage girl tuned a guitar with shaking hands. Emily felt the old familiar urge to disappear until she heard it, the unmistakable growl of motorcycles. The engines didn't roar like before. They rolled in slow, respectful, like a promise kept. Heads turned. Whispers followed. And then the doors opened. A bear walked in first, removing his helmet. Behind him came the others, leather jackets, patched vests, familiar faces. Not to take over. Not to intimidate. Just to be present. Emily's breath caught. Bear spotted her instantly and gave a small nod. No speeches. No spotlight. Just acknowledgement. That was when she understood something important. They hadn't given her confidence that night, they had returned it. The open mic began. One by one, people shared songs, poems, jokes that barely landed. Applause came anyway. Encouragement mattered more than talent. When Emily's name was called, her legs felt like borrowed parts. She walked to the microphone slowly. "I'm not a performer," she said, her voice trembling. "I just have something I need to say." The room went quiet. There was a time I thought being normal meant being invisible. Then one night, some strangers reminded me that being normal just means being treated like you belong. She looked toward the back. The bikers didn't clap. They didn't nod. They just stood there, steady, silent, solid, the way support often looks when it's real. Emily read her poem. It wasn't perfect. Her voice cracked. She paused to breathe. But she finished, and the applause that followed wasn't polite. It was earned. Afterward, a woman approached her with tears in her eyes. "I thought I was alone," she said. Then another. And another. Stories spilled out: grief, illness, loss, survival. Emily listened, really listened, realizing something else she hadn't expected. Healing spreads. Outside, Bear leaned against his bike. "You did good." Emily smiled, a real one, not the careful kind. "You didn't have to come." He shrugged. Normal people show up for each other. The engines started again as the night deepened. The angels rode off, not into legend, not into headlines, just back into their lives. And Emily walked home knowing she didn't need them to stay. They had already done what mattered. She pinned the small leather patch above her bed when she got home. Normal, not because she had finally become something else, but because she had finally accepted what she already was. And if this story reminded you that strength can look like kindness, that healing can start in unexpected places, then subscribe to the channel. Because sometimes the most unforgettable nights don't change the world, they change one life, and that's more than enough. The first time Emily wore the patch outside her apartment, she almost turned back. It was stitched onto the strap of her canvas bag, small, unremarkable to anyone else. But to her, it felt loud. Like an announcement. I was seen once. I mattered. The morning air was sharp, autumn creeping in, leaves scraping the sidewalk like whispered warnings. She headed toward the hospital, not as a patient this time. The volunteer badge felt strange against her chest. She had filled out the form 3 weeks earlier, hands shaking, convinced she'd never be strong enough to follow through. But here she was, walking through sliding doors that used to swallow her whole. In the waiting room, people sat in quiet misery. Parents pretending not to be afraid. Patients pretending not to notice the clock. Emily recognized every expression, she had worn them all. She sat beside a young woman with a scarf wrapped tight around her head. First time? Emily asked softly. The woman nodded. I don't feel normal anymore. Emily smiled, not sadly, not bravely, just honestly. Me neither. But that's okay. They talked. About nothing important. About everything that was. By the time the nurse called the woman's name, her hands had stopped shaking. Later that evening, Emily stepped outside and froze. Motorcycles lined the curb, not a crowd. Just three. Bear stood there again, helmet tucked under his arm. We heard you were doing something good, he said. Figured we'd see it. Emily laughed, surprised by the sound of it. You can't just show up everywhere. He grinned. Watch us. They rode together, not fast, not loud, to a small diner across town. The same jukebox. The same cracked booths. But this time, Emily walked in first. She wasn't a guest anymore, she belonged. Someone asked her to tell her story. She did, without tears this time. Without apology. Just truth. When I stopped trying to feel normal, she said, I started feeling alive. The night ended quietly. No spectacle. No miracle. Just people lingering because they didn't want the moment to end. At home, Emily wrote in her journal until dawn. She didn't write about pain. She wrote about purpose, and somewhere down a long highway, motorcycles carried that story forward, not because they were heroes, but because they understood something most people forget. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stay. If this chapter spoke to you, if you believe small acts can change lives, subscribe to the channel. Because there are more stories like this, waiting to be told, waiting to remind us that even the roughest roads can lead somewhere gentle.